What is our motivation for showing somebody compassion? I think it's an interesting question, and it's one that I think maybe would reveal some things about ourselves that we're not comfortable with acknowledging. When you look at the person of Christ, one of the things that you can see is that he had compassion on people. You see that through many of his miracles. Now, a lot of times when we start talking about miracles, people want to dig into what the miracles are and what the underlying theme is and all that. But I don't want to focus so much on the miraculous act itself as much as I want to look at what often caused Christ to perform some of these miracles that we read, specifically the way that we see them being expressed in the book of Mark. The book of Mark is very much about the actions of Christ. You know, there's a number of parables that are in there that tend to be very terse and very short, but you end up seeing the actions of Christ that kind of demonstrate his divine nature. And among those, obviously, are going to be many miracles. And what you see are that a lot of these miracles are often accompanied by acknowledgments that Christ felt compassion for other individuals. Now, I think it's interesting because when you look at the type of compassion that Christ had, it's very different than maybe what we base our sense of compassion on. A lot of times we will look at compassion and then we'll kind of qualify it, right? You know, we'll say, I have compassion on this person, so long as maybe they didn't put themselves in those situations. Or we'll have compassion on this person so long as we don't think that that person will maybe take that, become a recipient of compassion and then just, you know, being able to do bad things. You know, we'll sit here and apply all these conditions on compassion that a lot of times we don't see Christ actually apply. Instead, what we see is Christ looking at individuals and then saying, does this person want to know me more? If they want to have a relationship with their Creator, then those are the individuals that he chooses to demonstrate his glory through, you know, through these miraculous acts. Now, there's a whole study that goes along with even that right there, God showing his glory through his miraculous acts. But again, kind of just looking at the nature of Christ's compassion, look at what he didn't really ask. You know, he didn't look at any kind of follow-up. He didn't sit here and challenge whether these individuals were going to take their newfound health or their newfound, you know, life opportunity and squander it. Instead, you know, he looked at these individuals, he understood their heart, and he felt compassion for them. Now, I wonder how often we have the opportunity to show compassion to another individual, but we don't because maybe we are questioning their hearts. You know, maybe we're questioning things that we don't really have any way of verifying. Maybe we have our assumptions of what somebody is or who they are, and based on those assumptions, we sit here and dictate whether that individual is deserving or undeserving of our compassion. It's an important question for us to ask ourselves because once we sit here and acknowledge that maybe we apply certain standards to compassion that we don't see Christ apply to individuals that he shows his compassion, his grace, his glory through, it begs the question, why do we feel more qualified than Christ to withhold compassion from another individual? One of the things I really like about how Christ shows compassion is that there's always a sense of purpose to everything he does. And that's really the theme of the entire Bible, right? I mean, from Genesis all the way through Revelation, there's intentionality and purpose to every single thing God does. And Christ's sense of compassion is really no different. You can see this in his miracles. You know, sometimes he is simply rewarding somebody because they're making an earnest petition. And when I say a petition, I'm not just saying that they're going to the lottery machine and pulling a ticket and then hoping that they score. You know, these are individuals who understand what they are asking and they understand who they are asking it to, and as a result, God is trying to encourage them. You know, you have other instances where it's individuals who have faith. You know, they may not have like an academic understanding or they may not have had the opportunity yet to follow and show their sense of devotion, but yet they have faith in who Christ is. And as a result, Christ has compassion on them and rewards them in their moment of need. You know, you have Christ also looking at individuals who do demonstrate a sense of devotion, who understand the commitment they are making to following Christ. And as a result, God has compassion on them because because God understands that that sense of devotion sometimes comes with physical trials and with difficulties. And then you also have, these moments of endurance, where there's this sense of, purpose of encouraging individuals who are enduring by learning, by following, by doing. And then as a result of their endurance, Christ blesses them, has compassion on them in the trials that they're going to follow along the way. Regardless of which one of these examples you look at, what you can see is that there is this great sense of empathy for what Christ's followers are going through. And as a result of that feeling of empathy, Christ has compassion on them. Christ wants to encourage them. He wants to enable them to do good things, to, live a life that is more fulfilled. And I feel like so often when we look at the acts of compassion that we have an opportunity to execute, so often we don't view it in that same lens. We don't view it as a purposeful event in our lives where we can say, hey, I have this opportunity to show somebody something. And it doesn't have to be a huge thing. Sometimes maybe even the external action doesn't really look all that different than something you would do just because, hey, I want to feel good about myself, so I'm just going to do an act of charity. But when we sit here, we have an opportunity to help somebody out. Maybe it is giving to charity. Maybe that having compassion on somebody is showing forgiveness to an estranged family member whom nobody else will show forgiveness to. Maybe that act of compassion is doing something for somebody that bluntly doesn't really deserve to have a favor done for them. There are many different ways that compassion can reveal itself. But whenever those opportunities reveal themselves, the important question for us is, where is your heart? Is your heart in a state of purposeful compassion, or are you just being driven by maybe these more surface level feelings of charity? I want to feel good about myself and get those warm fuzzies because I did a nice thing. Maybe it's legalistic where, I'm going to do a nice thing because, hey, I know I'm supposed to, and that's what Jesus wants me to do, so I'm going to go do a nice thing. When you look at how Christ ended up serving and showing compassion on other individuals, it was always compassion that was driven by this greater sense of purpose. And we too should be driven by compassion the exact same way, that when I have that opportunity to give, to forgive, to serve, to do, those opportunities shouldn't be a calculation that I do based on what I think I can materially or non-materially get for myself. But instead, it should be driven by a sense of purpose. The sense of purpose that I live for as a result of having a life that is dedicated to Christ, and the sense of purpose that I desire in that other individual's life. When you look at the sense of compassion that Christ had on other individuals, it was not a sense of compassion that was based on return of investment. Oftentimes, that's what I think ends up happening. People look and they say, well, I don't want to give charity to this organization or this person because I think it's going to be squandered. I don't think it's going to be used correctly. And as a result, I don't think it's wise. Well, if you really think about it, that's kind of a return on investment way of thinking. Instead of looking and saying, there's somebody who is going through something, and maybe purposefully I can show compassion on them, and that would drive them in a different place. Maybe instead of just hawking $1 at somebody, you hawk $1 at them and you just say, I'll be praying for you. It's that simple. That's it. You just added a few words to it and it completely changed the inflection of what you did. Maybe you do reach out, and instead of, looking at an individual that's an estranged family member and saying, well, they made a lot of bad choices and they really need to reform themselves and all that, maybe instead, purposefully, you show them compassion, because you know what? You too understand what it feels like to know that you have screwed up. Because after all, we all have sinned in our lives, and God didn't withhold His compassion from us. There's so many different ways that we have an opportunity to serve others, to do for others, to give to others, to love on others that we don't take. And if you really boil it down to the root cause of why we don't take those opportunities, it's so often tied to the fact that we are making some sort of equity calculation in our minds that Christ never did to us. And I think that should challenge us. When we have the opportunity to show compassion on another individual, are we too busy applying our own rubrics to actually do, to give, to be for another individual that Christ, that so many others have been in our own lives? Or are we looking at those opportunities, humbling ourselves and acknowledging that if God did for me, then I need to do for this other individual? Because if that is the mentality, if that latter thing is what we're thinking when we have these opportunities to show compassion, then we are living purposefully, not for ourselves, but for something that is divine, for something that is glorious. We are living for the same cause and for the same purpose and the same creator that we see Christ acting for throughout his own ministry. And if I sit here and I look at the type of glory that Christ showed other individuals through this miraculous actions, and I know I have an opportunity to be a part of that same thing, I'm not going to think twice. I want to be a part of that blessing. I want to be a part of experiencing that glory. And one easy way of doing that is to show compassion. That's our lesson that we have for today. I hope you're able to get something out of it. Until we can meet again, God bless.